Hello, welcome to Lecture 10 of Introduction to the Sikhs. After a long excursion into Sikh history, we're going to turn to the arts. Today we'll talk about architecture and art. And actually, history will never be far from what we're looking at because it really does shape the community in so many ways. Just to give you a recap of Sikh history, just to remind you of everything we've covered of the last 500 years. The 1500s represent the founding and growth of the Sikh community. Then from 1606, when Guru Arjan was martyred, to the 1750s, we can characterize that as a struggle for survival. Then from the 1760s to 1849 is a period of Sikh sovereignty, starting with small independent states and then the Sikh kingdom of Ranjit Singh. And 1849 is when the Sikh kingdom is annexed by the British imperial power. 1849 to 1947 is the colonial period, ending with the independence of India from Britain. And for the Sikh community, this is a period of what I'd characterize as reform and revival. And then from 1947 to the present, already more than 7 decades, is what I describe as a struggle for identity and autonomy within a much larger nation, democratic nation, but still a nation that's struggling to define itself, the modern state of India. I'd like to actually just to finish up this excursion into history, I'd like to make another connection. We talked about the founding of the Khalsa, and earlier I taught you a common Sikh greeting, Sat Sri Akal. This is another Sikh greeting, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh, and it translates as the Khalsa belongs to the divine, victory belongs to the divine. And of course, this comes from the period after Guru Gobind Singh's founding of the Khalsa, and it's used by a lot of Sikhs today. So let's turn to Sikh architecture, and we'll be focusing on gurdwaras, which really are the representation of Sikh architecture. History will be very important here because the architectural styles that we'll focus on are to be found in these gurdwaras, which represent significant historical events. In many cases, the buildings are much more modern than the events that they commemorate. So this is what can be called Anandpur Sahib, but Anandpur Sahib also refers to the wider community that surrounds this particular building. So this building more properly is known as Keshgarh Sahib. Sahib, of course, is a term of respect. Anandpur is the town where Guru Gobind Singh lived and founded the Khalsa. And Keshgarh literally means fort of Kesh, and Kesh is hair. So again, a very strong connection with the Khalsa. I've chosen a slightly elevated view, aerial view, and hopefully you can see some of the architectural features. There are arches, and the main thing I want to point out is that there's a central dome, and there are 2 smaller domes in the front, and then even smaller domes at the corners. This building actually has a roof level that can be walked on all around, and then in the middle, of course, there's another couple of stories. So this is a very imposing structure, and again, it marks a very significant site in Sikh history. This is Fatehgarh Sahib, and Fateh, as I pointed out earlier from the Sikh greeting, means victory, and Garh again is fort. This is the site of the execution of Guru Gobind Singh's 2 younger sons. And again, you can see the central dome and 4 corner domes, and also even smaller domes surrounding the central dome. The style here is very heavily influenced by Persian and Mughal architecture, and the domes are somewhat similar in style and shape to what you find in mosques or other buildings from the Mughal Empire or from the Persian Empire. You can also see here there's marble walkways around, and often there'll be some matting for people to walk on when the marble is too cold or too hot, and often the entrance will have a covered walkway, again to protect visitors from the sun. This is Gurdwara Bangla Sahib. This is in Delhi. This is a site where Guru Har Krishan lived and died when he was summoned to Delhi by the Emperor Aurangzeb. And this is a little bit different. You have, again, you have a central dome, and you have two golden domes in the front, and then smaller domes at the back and back corners. And you can also see perhaps a little cupola at ground level in the front. This, as you can see, this Gurdwara has a tank or what Sikhs would call sarovar, and people will come and bathe in this as well. You can't see it in the photograph, but one can walk all around the perimeter of this pool. This is now turning to a completely different time and location. The earlier buildings marked Sikh history. This is very much a representation of the Sikh present. This is the Gurdwara in San Jose, California, and this is the largest Gurdwara in North America. This actually built on a hillside, and it has some fountains in the front. There's an entrance building which has a large dome, and again you can see 4 smaller domes on the corners. Then there are 2 smaller buildings on either side which are used for smaller events, and then behind the main entrance building you can see it's maybe hard to really discern its size, but it's actually a very large building, and again you can see domes at the corners. Now back to India, and this is the Darbar Sahib in Amritsar, and again you can see the 4 domes on the corners and a central dome, not quite in the center of the building, but slightly towards the front. This is really a very significant architectural conception. The building itself is in the middle of this sacred pool. That's where the name Amritsar comes from. Amrit being nectar, and Sar being pool or tank. And the significant feature of this building is that it is actually set at a lower level than the surrounding walkway, and that is to symbolize humility. And this was a very important message that Guru Arjan, who supervised the building of the Darbar Sahib, wanted to convey. You can see in this, if you look back at the other earlier photos, you can see that the domes are actually also not as tall as in some of the previous examples. In the west, this building is often called the Golden Temple, and that, of course, comes from the gold leaf around the building, on the building. That was actually added in the reign of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and the original building did not have that gold. You can also see part of the surrounding complex. There's a clock tower to the upper left of the building, and there are a lot of residences and other buildings surrounding this complex. This is an aerial view. You can see the Darbar Sahib in the bottom of this picture, And what I particularly want to point out in this is towards the upper part of this picture is the Akal Takht. And you can tell from this that it's a taller building than the Darbar Sahib. It also has a taller dome. The other significant feature is that while it is in some sense facing the Darbar Sahib and the gate that leads to the walkway to the Darbar Sahib, it is actually slightly angled away to indicate that it's not meant to overbear the spiritual center. And the Akal Takht, Akal of course means timeless and Takht means throne. This was built by Guru Har Gobind as part of his response to the execution of his father Guru Arjan. And Guru Har Gobind took on the mantle of temporal authority as well as spiritual authority in the face of oppression from the Mughal Empire. So the Akal Takht is a very significant building. Another connection with history is that the Akal Takht was very badly damaged in the 1984 attack on the Golden Temple by the Indian government. There's a further story to that the Indian government rebuilt the Akal Takht without consulting the community. And the community then proceeded to demolish the Indian government's construction and build it themselves using their own labor. And again, that was very symbolic of the sovereignty and self-authority of the Sikh community. Let's turn now to art, Sikh art. Scholars have somewhat debated a little bit what does Sikh art mean, and we can think of that as art about Sikhs as well as art by Sikhs, and of course the two categories would overlap. This painting and the next two are from the life of Guru Nanak, and these are from an early 19th century manuscript which illustrates stories from the life of Guru Nanak. In this painting, Guru Nanak is sitting in a storehouse where he worked before he had his revelation from the divine. And this style is very similar to Mughal painting at the time and Persian painting. There's a lot of these paintings are small. There's a lot of attention to detail and to geometric composition, but not really a use of perspective in the modern sense. There's also very often very vibrant colors. These are two more paintings from the same illustrated copy of the Janam Sakhis, the life of Guru Nanak. Janam means birth and Sakhis, stories. And these two illustrate the marriage procession and the marriage ceremony of Guru Nanak. So again, these illustrations are the artist's conception, probably not a Sikh artist, but they are very, very realistic in the sense that the artist would have had a good idea of what these events would have looked like at the time of Guru Nanak. And you can see Guru Nanak arriving on a white horse for his marriage. That is part of a tradition where the bridegroom's family would go to the bride's village to meet them and to conduct the ceremony, and then take the bride home with them to the bridegroom's village. Now let's turn to some more modern paintings, and I'll start with a painter who was perhaps the best known and most influential Sikh artist of the 20th century. Sobha Singh was initially a commercial artist in the early 20th century, and he literally had an inspiration where he started painting religious themes, and his style is very much a modern Western style, but he almost exclusively painted themes from Sikh history. This is a painting you've seen earlier of Guru Nanak sitting and meditating, surrounded by his two companions, Bhai Mardana, the Muslim minstrel who played the rabab, and then Bhai Bala, who was, as I've argued, introduced later after Guru Nanak's life to create a balance and doesn't really have any historical basis. This is a very popular image of Guru Nanak, and there are several others like this, painted by Sobha Singh. And Guru Nanak is raising his hand in blessing and looking towards the viewer. Typically in these portraits, Guru Nanak is shown as an older man with a white beard. You saw in the Janam Sakhi paintings, Guru Nanak depicted as a youth. This is also Sobha Singh, a very well-known portrait of Guru Gobind Singh. And again, you can see some of the differences where Guru Gobind Singh is shown in a much more sovereign or royal posture, and wearing a turban with a jewel and a feather. And you've seen other paintings, earlier paintings of Guru Gobind Singh, where he's on a horse and carrying a sword. This is an unusual portrait by Sobha Singh, and this is actually a painting of a young Sikh revolutionary, Bhagat Singh. And Bhagat Singh was inspired by the revolutionary fervor of the time, and he participated in attacks on some of the British authorities, and he was caught and executed at the age of 23 in 1931. Now, Bhagat Singh abandoned his Sikh faith when he was a revolutionary, but Sobha Singh has chosen to show him in his prison cell just before his execution, where he embraced the Sikh faith again. And as a revolutionary in hiding from the authorities, he had cut his hair, but here he's shown with his long hair again. And interestingly, this is actually based on a photograph of Bhagat Singh in his prison cell. Now I'll turn to another Sikh artist, and she did not really paint Sikh themes. She was maybe not even a practicing Sikh. Her father was Sikh. Her mother was Hungarian. She grew up in Europe. Amrita Shergill, though, I think was perhaps the most important Indian painter of the 20th century, and I'll explain why. Here's a photograph of Amrita Shergill, and here's a portrait that she painted, a self-portrait, which is, you can see, very similar to the photograph. And in this, she's in her early 20s. Amrita Shergill actually died in her late 20s of an illness, which was quite tragic. Amrita Shergill grew up in Europe, studied painting in Europe. Here's, for example, an early painting of very much in a sort of French academic style, showing 3 European women in a salon. And here's another self-portrait by Amrita Shergill, much more informal than the first one I showed you. And you can see that you can see some of her personality showing through in this. Again, she's just in her late 20s here. Amrita Shergill went to India as a young woman and was inspired to change her painting style and subject matter, and that's what makes her a truly significant Indian painter. She started painting ordinary people in India, especially women, and especially showing them going about their daily lives. So here's a group of women engaged in some tasks in a village, and here's another painting of women and men sitting in a urban setting, and you can see the very strong use of color and geometric compositions. And really, she, I think, changed the way that people looked at the Indian people, at least for painters after her. Till then, a lot of Indian painting had just been of rulers and people of power and prestige, though the British had, when they came in the early 19th centuries, did start painting ordinary people, but again, more as a curiosity than really as representing them in their daily lives. So again, Amrita Shergill, I think, represents a very important milestone in the history of Indian art. Now we'll go forward in time and also jump continents. Amrit and Rabindra Kaur Singh are two modern painters, very much alive, and they were actually born in Britain, so they are part of the Sikh diaspora, which we'll be talking about in more detail in a future lecture. Here's one photograph of them. They're twins, and here's another very nice photograph of them working, and you can get a sense of their style. What they've done is to take the compositional approach of Mughal and Persian miniature painting and apply it to modern themes, especially in the context of the Sikh diaspora. Here, for example, is a painting showing a wedding of some of the ceremonies for the wedding of a relative. The two sisters have painted themselves, helping the bride get ready, and there's a couple of children in the foreground enjoying the wedding preparations, playing around. This is another painting by the twins with a wedding theme, and here you can see a groom arriving on a white horse, but this is not 16th century Punjab or 15th century Punjab. This is 20th century Great Britain, and the setting is then some Midlands English town. You can see on the bottom right the English neighbors looking with some degree of surprise or some kind of reaction to this alien presence. You can see a lot of the representation of modern British life as the wedding party arrives at the bride's house. There's many other paintings with these kind of themes by the twins, and they make a really wonderful visual representation of British Sikh life. The final painting I want to show you by Amrit and Rabindra Kaur Singh, though, takes us back to events in Punjab, and this is the 1984 attack on Darbar Sahib, the so-called Operation Blue Star. This is a painting which is really quite remarkable in terms of its power. It's, again, not a very large painting, but it's full of a lot of detail. In the middle, you can see, again, this is not using modern Western styles of perspective, but much more in the 18th century miniature style. In the middle, you can see the Darbar Sahib, and it's very strikingly surrounded. The pool is tainted with, the sacred pool is tainted with blood, very bright red blood. You can see the clock tower that was in the earlier photograph. The soldiers are attacking from the right. There, in the bottom left, is Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister of India at the time, and she's shown symbolically sitting on an army tank. There are pilgrims fleeing and being killed in this composition. And then there are also scenes from Sikh history showing Sikh warriors and examples of sacrifice from the 18th century. So this in one painting, this captures not just the horror and brutality of the attack on Darbar Sahib, but also connects it with the political events that led to that, and also connects it to the Sikh history of sacrifice and struggle against oppression. This next set of slides, some people may find uncomfortable, so feel free to skip over them or turn away your eyes. And I want to show you examples of painting that represents this history of martyrdom and sacrifice. Most of these paintings are from representing events from the early 18th century when Sikhs were being hunted and killed by the Mughal authorities. And they are, of course, 20th century paintings, but they represent events from the early 18th century. These events are also still remembered in the Sikh daily prayer, the Ardas, which I mentioned in one of my earlier lectures, ends with a plea for the welfare of all, but along the way it also reflects on the sacrifice that has been made by members of the community in the past. So Sikhs were boiled in oil, chopped limb from limb, scalped, sawed in half, and so that's the history that Sikhs never want to forget. This last painting is quite different, and this brings us partway towards the present. This is from events in around 1920-21, where the Gurdwara, which was the birthplace of Guru Nanak, Nankana Sahib, was occupied by, controlled by what were called Mahants. And these were functionaries who had taken control of the Gurdwaras when mainstream Khalsa Sikhs were in hiding to avoid being massacred and killed. And these functionaries were given more solid legal status by the British when the British colonists took over Punjab. Sikhs felt that these functionaries were perverting the Sikh faith and were agitating against to have them removed. And in these events, Sikhs were peacefully demonstrating to gain control of Nankana Sahib, and there were British police present, but they did not stop the henchmen of the Mahant firing on the crowd. In this painting shows Balbir Kaur, and she was actually marching with her baby. The baby was killed. She put her baby down, kept marching, and then was shot down herself. And so this is an example of how this tradition of sacrifice continues in the Sikh community. There's a link in Canvas to a website which has more details of this part of Sikh history. So that is what I wanted to show you in terms of examples of Sikh art. But of course, there are many other examples of Sikh art, and I would encourage you to look at some of those. I also don't want to, even though I ended with examples of martyrdom and sacrifice, I also want to remind you that another very important Sikh ideal is that of Chardhi Kala, a spirit of optimism, and that balances the examples of, I think, martyrdom and sacrifice. So in our next lecture, we'll turn to looking at literature and film, and again look at both aspects of these themes in life.